Hello and welcome to the Beyond Boundaries podcast. So happy to have you with me. I am your host, Justin Douglas. If you want to learn more about me or find the show notes for this episode, you can go to pastorjustindouglas.com. You can interact there with feedback, comments, and questions, or you can reach out via Instagram. I'm at Pastor Justin Douglas. I am currently recording this episode right now, like this intro to the episode. The episode's already been recorded, but the intro to the episode in Bethlehem. Yes, Bethlehem, Palestine. That's where I'm at right now. And if you want to go to pastorjustindouglas.com, you can see some of the videos that I've been shooting here. And also you can go there to my Instagram to see some of the images that I'm capturing daily. I'm doing my best to post as much as I can, but the internet, the Wi-Fi out here is spotty most of the time. So it hasn't made it easy for me to post videos, but I've been able to get a couple videos up. One of the videos is a tour of the Church of the Nativity. Another one is a tour of Ida Refugee Camp. So go to pastorjustindouglas.com, scroll down on the blog portion, and find those videos. They're really great. Would love for you to check those out. Today is episode 9. 9 isn't just the episode number. It is a theme throughout this podcast episode. My good friend Annette Moran joins me, and we talk about the Enneagram. Don't know what the Enneagram is? That's fine. This is a great intro into what it is and why it matters. I hope you give this episode a chance. I was once an Enneagram skeptic. It took me some time to come around to this concept, but I think this is an episode that could be really helpful for all of us. I know just a basic knowledge of the Enneagram has helped me grow as an individual and in my relationships. So here it is, my interview with Annette Moran on the Enneagram. All right, I'm here with Annette Moran, and we are going to talk about the Enneagram. I'm excited for this one, Annette. I'm excited to talk to you about the Enneagram. Annette is a good family friend. We hang out and go out, and Annette loves talking about the Enneagram. So no matter what you have heard about Annette or what she's going to tell you, she is maybe not. She's going to tell you she's not an authority on the Enneagram, but she talks a lot about the Enneagram, and I love her passion for it and her desire to see it inform people's lives and relationships and really the freedom she's found in it, but also the freedom she desires that others might find in it. And so this is going to be a great episode for you to learn a little more about the Enneagram. But before we dive into the Enneagram, Annette, do you want to tell people just a little bit about yourself personally, who you are, what you're about, what you do, all that?
Sure. I'm Annette. I'm a wife. I've been married 19 years. I have 3 kids who this week will be 12, 14, and 16.
Oh, wow. Whose birthday is it this week when you say this
Megan
week?
and Shane's. So
Wow.
they're going to be 14 and 16.
Oh, and their birthdays are the same week?
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So I have 3 kids. I've been working in social work / mental health / education for 25 years. So I've done most of my career has been direct care, working with people. Presently, I work for a program called Early Head Start, which is, I'm basically like a parenting coach to families who technically fall into poverty, and they have children between birth and 3. So my job is going into people's homes and having weekly visits and talking about child development for the young ages, but also just really giving parents support to do one of the hardest jobs that there is. And it's even somewhat a little like life coaching at times. So
Sure.
That's the work I do then, or for my paycheck. And yeah, my life's pretty much full with my family, and I just recently started CrossFit.
Yeah. Yes,
Crazy
you did.
world. So there's that. But anyway, yes, I have been dubbed the Enneagram girl because of late, probably over the last year, it's one of my favorite things for sure.
So when you say direct care and like parenting coaching, do you think your connection to that has even informed like the importance of the Enneagram? Because obviously, as you have a history of education, direct care with people. that probably means a certain level of like emotional intelligence and I guess relational connection that maybe some other jobs don't require. And so can you maybe, before we dive into what the Enneagram is, which today, I mean, I know a little bit about the Enneagram, not as much as you, but I'll kind of play today as like a very novice, to try to help maybe if someone's navigating this podcast hearing about the Enneagram for the very first time, that I can ask some questions that are very basic. But before we dive into that, can you maybe share just how you came across the Enneagram and why it's important to you before we dive into what it is?
Sure. I have become a podcast fan, for sure.
That's a good thing to be a fan of, by the way. I think you should rate, subscribe, and review all the podcasts that you listen to.
That's
maybe idea. This one too, but no, I'm just kidding.
Great idea. So I started listening to podcasts, and of course, gravitated to certain ones as my favorite. And some of them were the Liturgists, Rob Bell, Rachel Hollis, and all of the above started throwing out and mentioning the Enneagram. And then even the Liturgists, one of their most downloaded podcasts was in fact on the Enneagram. Mm-hmm. So that's how I was exposed to it. And I had already, so I'm 48 years old, over the last 5 years, just who I am, my own story, my own journey. I definitely was at a place in life where, for many different reasons, that I just wanted to start to understand myself a little better and do work on myself and my inner work that I had not really done before. I had not done before, truthfully. And I had started that process with therapy, which was a great experience, which I'm a big fan of.
Yeah.
So I was on that journey of just starting to try to get to know myself better, to really go deeper underneath the layers that, we all just put on. And then I was listening to these podcasts. They mentioned the Enneagram. I had never been interested in the Myers-Briggs, in the DISC, in the Fab Five, all the other personality typing systems. I actually had a response which a lot of people say to me about the Enneagram, which is, I'm not really interested in being boxed into a type. Oh, wow. I think people are far more complex than that, which a lot of people say when I talk about the Enneagram. I felt the same way. So I was exposed to the Enneagram. It's such a interesting system. Its name alone is just kind of weird. So I heard these podcasts that I enjoyed mention it. So I bought a book, The Road Back to You by Ian Cron, and I started reading the book and listening to podcasts, and I was immediately enthralled. And we'll get to it when I talk about the Enneagram. It's interesting. The Enneagram talks about 9 types of personalities. So the first thing you have to do is figure out your type, which is somewhat complicated and different for everybody. For me, figuring out my type actually was very easy and came quick. So I started from the beginning of being exposed to the Enneagram. It was very personally applicable. So,
okay, and to your work as well,
and to my work as well. Absolutely, the nature of my work is definitely relational. When you the families I work with volunteer to have our program once a week in their home for an hour and a half. But our program is only as effective as the relationship is.
Yeah.
So going into people's homes and being a person that is that feels pleasant to be around, safe to be around, because when you invite someone into your home, it's very intimate. It's the real deal. So certain skills I have and parts of who I am fit that. But the Enneagram and the thinking behind the Enneagram really has enhanced my ability to be with families and form relationships, because the Enneagram is really good at helping us learn to appreciate and understand differences.
Okay.
So on one hand, I have found it has helped me have a lot more understanding and compassion for people.
Awesome. So if I was to just say, hey, what's the Enneagram? Would the best way of like summarizing that, if you were to only have like a sentence, would be like, it's a personality assessment typing system?
Yeah. Most people say personality typing system.
Okay. Yeah, because assessment assumes a test. And I know there's a variety of opinions on like whether or not you should take a test with the Enneagram, right?
Yeah.
So what do you think the next best place to go is? Do you think we should just dive into like, so there's 9 types?
There are 9 types. I mean, I like to describe the Enneagram a little.
Yeah, let's describe the Enneagram a little, and then we can go into each type.
Yeah.
Because I think going into each type would be good, so that people understand like what each type is about.
Absolutely.
You know, what it's revealing. But like, yeah, go into the Enneagram a little bit, just about basically like, obviously the one sentence thing is it's a personality typing system, but like maybe in going into it, we can, if you are familiar, like even our staff has used DISC, our staff and leadership team at the Bridge has used DISC, which has been super helpful to like see, okay, this person operates out of this particular personality, and that's why they're thinking that way, or that's why, you know, maybe they have, maybe it can seem like they're a contrarian to every idea you bring to them, but really it's actually just their personality to process things from an oppositional standpoint, right?
Absolutely.
So like the DISC can be really helpful in revealing to you, that it's not that this person is against you, it's that this person's personality is something that desires to process things in a different way. So I'd love to hear, as you kind of expand on the Enneagram, why you also maybe think it's different than, or why there might be value in knowing your number if you also know your DISC assessment, or you know your Myers-Briggs, why this might be a little bit unique and even different from some of the other personality typing systems.
Okay. A couple things. The Enneagram, a lot of times, it does have a strange name. All that it actually means is a diagram of 9. So it's just the fact that there are 9 personality types in this system, and that they actually, the 9 numbers are put around a circle, so it's a diagram of 9. So that's all that the Enneagram means.
Okay, I didn't know that. That's great.
Because some people are like, is that satanic? Is it like the pentagram? Nope, it just means a diagram of 9.
Yeah.
So it's that
Great.
simple. The Enneagram is very interesting. No one knows who created the Enneagram, when, where, or how.
I've heard theories though about like it being attached to like, I don't know if I want to say the Essenes, but like in essence the monks of the 1st century or 2nd century, that it almost potentially can be traced back to, Christian, the Essenes being Jewish Christian, like at that time, like, seeking to like be away from the people. So when I say monks, I mean like monastic type living, that this was something that they might have used. Now, I don't know if I like heard that secondhand, if that's even true, or if that's something that's been posited by other people, but
I mean, Enneagram experts, no one can completely trace it perfectly, but they do say around the 4th century, and they do believe out of monasteries. So your information was...
maybe I was close.
You're in the ballpark. And a lot of people describe that the Enneagram has just been a work in progress over all these years.
So what it looked like in the 4th century may have been very different than what we have currently.
Right. The basis of it is similar, but that it's definitely grown and developed. In recent time, Father Richard Rohr in the 70s, he was taught it, and he wrote a book about it, and he began to teach it. And at that time, there was a bit of popularity here in the West. And a lot of people say that at that point, as it's been a work in progress, that there was a lot more psychological components, almost like psychotherapeutic components added to it. So I say all that to say it has a bit of a mysterious past.
Yeah.
And that's sort of weird.
Which, it might be compelling or it might be weird.
Yeah, because it's like, oh, Myers-Briggs was created here by these people, as was the disc or whatever. But the Enneagram just has this sort of mystical, mysterious history.
It's my sense that like Myers-Briggs and disc are very like corporate tools, whereas I kind of sense the Enneagram is more of a spiritual tool. Is that fair? Like,
yes,
I don't know. Like,
it is now. Plenty of people are using it in workplaces and corporations as they do the other systems. But by and large, most people consider the Enneagram definitely a spiritual tool. It has a lot of roots in Christianity, but plenty of people have and continue to use it outside of Christianity. So it's not exclusive to being Christian, but it definitely has strong roots in that camp.
Anything else we want to say before we dive into the 9 types?
The 9 types. No, I think that's a good introduction.
Okay.
So the Enneagram, it is a complex, fluid system, but it starts with 9 personality types. And one important thing to know about the Enneagram and these types is that the Enneagram explains that in childhood, most of us, or that all of us, will gravitate to one of these 9 personality types because they are what feels most comfortable to us and most safe for us to sort of put on to exist in the world. So what's interesting about the Enneagram is that the personality types aren't all happy, rainbow, this is wonderful about myself. A lot about your Enneagram type is actually behaviors, fears, motivations that are actually not healthy and that need some work. So the Enneagram is I do like to tell people when I'm introducing them to it that it's definitely not the type of system that you quickly find out your type and you're just excited to put that on the wall. A lot of Enneagram teachers, including Richard Rohr, say that frequently when you do find your type, your response is like, no, not that. I don't want to be that.
Or it's like, I don't want to
deal with this.
Well, I don't want to deal with this, or I don't want to come to the reality of the conclusion that this is me, even though I know this is me. Like, does that make sense? Like, like that's been, I think, a lot of what I've heard people say, and maybe even a little bit of my own conclusion.
Yeah.
But like,
definitely mine.
But I think that's probably why it's so. I think for a lot of people I know who have found the Enneagram very helpful, it's been most helpful in their relationships, certainly and especially their intimate relationships. Yeah. Meaning, like, when you talk about fears and behaviors, so much of those just two, silos, fears and behavior, can drive us to deeper relationships when we begin to understand our fears and how they motivate us, but then also how our behaviors from our personality can operate positively or negatively, right? Because like a certain number might have, hey, when you're in a positive place, here's what it looks like. When you're in a negative place, here's what it looks like. And then you're kind of like, oh yeah, that's so true. And I can look back and be like, okay, yeah, I was in a negative place when I did that, said that, thought that, had that argument or whatever. You know what I mean? Like, so I think the numbers and learning your number can have a huge impact on how you see yourself, but also how you see yourself in relation to the relationships you have.
Absolutely.
Is that fair?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
That, for me, that has been the reason that I am so excited about the Enneagram is starting with self-awareness, starting with learning things about myself, facing things about myself, knowing myself on a deeper level than I had before. It has been a really helpful tool. My husband Ryan, he says all the time, it's a tool in your tool belt. There's many great tools in life that we can use. This is one that's very helpful for self-awareness, self-growth, and even self-transformation if we're willing to do the hard work, which in a spiritual context, the point of the Enneagram is to learn about yourself and then to apply like practices like contemplative practices to grow, work towards health, work towards wholeness. So
Richard Rohr would be a great probably reference for some of those more contemplative practices because he runs the Center for Action and Contemplation, correct? And then he has his own podcast. So I'll put a link to that in there. But Richard Rohr is a great follow-up to that when you think about contemplative practices, if that's something that's new to you, or maybe you're coming from more of an evangelical experience and you haven't really been introduced to contemplative practices. That would be an opportunity to dive a little deeper into that if you want to look into Richard Rohr or Google him or find the link that I put up on the show notes. So all right, so should we go 1 through 9?
Okay, let's do it.
All right, so what is number 1? What's the title of number 1?
Okay, I am reading directly from Ian Cron's book, which is called The Road Back to You.
Great.
Just because he says it perfectly, so no need to change that. Okay, type 1 are often called the perfectionists.
Oh man, you're reading somebody's mail already.
And his description is the perfectionist. Ethical, dedicated, and reliable. They are motivated by a desire to live the right way, to improve the world, and to avoid fault and blame.
Ooh, okay.
So there's type 1.
So, great. Like, do you want to talk at all about type 1? Like, I guess when we think about the perfectionist, how many people do you know? So, like, there might be people who are like, I'm definitely a perfectionist. But, like, I'm kind of a perfectionist. Like being a musician, there's certain parts of me that are like, I want to get it perfect before we move on with it. But this isn't my number, or at least I don't think it's my number. A lot of the other descriptors don't really match, and it wasn't like the thing that like connected with me. Like, yeah, that's definitely me. Like, I'll let you know my number when we get there. But like, but there is a certain element of like, as you read through these, you might see a little bit of yourself in each of them, right? And that's okay.
Oh yeah,
like, that's not weird.
Almost every teacher I've listened to of the Enneagram will say that they believe we all can identify with all 9 types because we're humans, we're complex, we're all beautiful individuals. But the idea with the Enneagram is that we would be dominant in one type. So there's the one type that that really does resonate with how we've been processing the world. I mean, some teachers, definitely Ian Cron, say that these 9 personality types are 9 different ways of being in the world. So another teacher says that these are 9 stories that we adopt and we tell ourselves.
I like that.
And frequently, especially in childhood and in our young adult years, they are helpful. And as we're growing and learning about ourselves, but then there comes a point, different for everybody, where it's time to grow and to change and to realize that these personality types may have kept us safe and may have been a way that we found our place in life, but that in order to keep going on the journey and to get healthier, that we need to really look at things for what they are. So with the ones, back to the ones, the side of the ones that, that's a description of the one, but I like this next explanation, which kind of goes into the unhealthy components of a one.
Yeah.
So for ones can feel a compulsive need to perfect the world. They're keenly aware that neither they nor anyone else can live up to their impossibly high standards. So they often experience anger in the form of smoldering resentment.
Ooh.
So obviously...
So someone's hearing this now and being like, shut up, Annette. No, I don't.
You could say, shut up, Ian.
No, I don't.
So this is part of the thing about the Enneagram that's so cool is that 2 people, 3 people, 4 people, we could have similar outward behaviors, but what internally is driving us, the fears, the needs, the motivations, that's what the Enneagram really hones in on and is about.
And that's where it makes you more empathetic because you're actually starting to see, okay, there's something behind why this person's acting this way.
Absolutely.
It's not a hatred toward me. It's
Exactly.
not just to hurt me. There's something happening that's causing this behavior that's deeper than me, whether that's a coping mechanism they picked up as a child, whether that's something they experienced that is being repurposed, that drove them to act this way.
Yeah.
Now, that's not an excuse for people who do things that are damaging or have behaviors that are damaging, but it helps, I think, us understand that there's a motivation that they may not even be aware of, right? That they've adopted. And that's where when you become aware of it, it can be very hard to be like, oh, yeah, I've got some things to work on because sometimes it's hard to admit we've got things to work on.
Oh, totally.
But when you do, it can actually make you a lot healthier in a lot of those relationships that maybe have been stressed or just been working through conflict.
Yeah.
And owning your slice of the pie in that conflict, which can be
totally.
really hard to do. Okay, so we have the perfectionist.
Yes.
And we hear what the perfectionist is about. Is there any, I know sometimes they tell you like popular people that are perfectionists. Do you know any other popular people that are perfectionists? That's okay if you don't have
I don't have those off the top of
No,
my head.
that's okay. Do you know anybody who's a perfectionist? Do you know people?
Yes.
Like, and like.
One of my closest friends.
Oh, that's great. So did you know that right when you read through the Enneagram that was that person's personality? I'm just always curious.
Actually,
or after you talk to
and
them
you know the same person, but I
okay,
won't say
don't
her
say
name.
their name. That's fine. I don't want to say names. Yeah.
When she was trying to discover her type, she actually, and this is very common, she equally 2 different numbers, an 8 and a 1. She actually took a test. There are tests, but I always caution people, some people will discover their number through a test, but very many people do not.
Gotcha.
Because the nature of the Enneagram, it just requires a lot of honesty. And a lot of Enneagram experts just recommend people getting to know the different 9 types and coming to each one honestly. Maybe also using a test, but not. There are a lot of people who take a test and do not find their number. I actually did, but like my husband did not. Like it took him 6 months to figure out his number. And this friend I'm talking about, who is a 1, she took a test and it said that she equally scored an 8 and a 1. So it was only through learning more about both types that she was able to zone in and realize she's a 1.
Because there's an element of like self-discovery here, right? Like that I think can actually be like, it's fine to take a test. We live in a microwave culture. So like, I don't want to wait 6 months and that I want to just go log into Google and type an Enneagram test and take the test and know what number I am. And then just start going. Like that's how you want to do it. You know what I mean? Like that's how we want to do everything.
Right.
But to actually like have to wrestle with like, which one am I really like? Yeah. Like, let me actually do some assessment of my own life and like the internal work that even is discovering like the number you are can be a process. I know for a long time I was like, I think I could be this, but I also think I could be this, but I also think I could be this. Like, and like kind of like narrowing it down a little more and more and then like learning more about them, but also finding myself in situations where I'm like, oh, it's so my knee-jerk reaction right now to act this way. Like I'm doing everything I can to shut down acting this way. And it's usually in those high stress, high tense moments that you then are like contemplating the Enneagram somehow, either after the fact or in the middle of it. And you're like, oh yeah, I'm pretty sure I'm leaning this way toward this type in this moment. And the truth is like how you act in those kind of fight or flight moments is a picture into your default personality. Like, and so that can help you know, like, okay, clearly there's something here. And after you have a few of those experiences, you're like, okay, this is probably my number. Yep. That's not to say taking a test is a bad thing. I've actually taken one of the tests. But I'm saying like, I think the self-discovery aspect of it can also be part of the Enneagram journey, right? Because there's a value in doing some of the internal work required to like discover your number that way. So okay. Yeah. So we finished number 1. What's number 2?
Number 2. Let's see. Number 2 are called the helper. And this is the description: warm, caring, and giving. They are motivated by a need to be loved and needed, and to avoid acknowledging their own needs. 2s direct all their attention and energy toward meeting the needs of others while disavowing having any of their own needs. Their secret belief that they alone know what's best for others and that they're indispensable reveals their prideful spirit.
Ooh.
Yes. A lot of times when you hear 2s talk, initially when you hear about a 2 and you think you may be a 2, it's like, this is wonderful. I care about people. I'm always thinking about other people.
Oh, you're so
I'm in
prideful.
Service to other people. But the dark side, the shadow side, is the fact that often 2s have a strong tendency to think they're better than other people because they care so much about others and they almost know what's better for others than maybe the other people.
Wow.
But I mean, there's so much to the Enneagram, but one teacher, she was describing different characteristics of God that we can see in each number.
Of course.
Obviously, the helper.
Yeah.
Like, everyone wants a helper in their life. Someone who loves them, who cares for them, who thinks about them, who goes out of their way to serve them. So, I mean, 2s are sweethearts. I think they're called the sweethearts of the Enneagram.
Wow.
So, there's a lot of great qualities in every personality type, but the thing that 2s really have to work on is learning to take care of themselves, learning to value themselves and their own needs, and to face their own stuff instead of just all external, taking care of everybody else, serving everybody else. So,
as a pastor, I would say I know a few 2s who maybe know their 2s or don't know their 2s that sometimes are so actively serving others at the expense of themselves.
Oh, totally.
So self-care, I think, is really big for 2s in the sense of like, because again, if the Enneagram is also helping us build healthier relationships, the healthier relationship might be that your default is so much bent toward helping others that you sometimes have to consider your health in the process.
Absolutely.
Like it's kind of like when you fly with children and they're like, put your mask on before you put your kid's mask on. It's like the idea of like, can you really keep this up? Because and sometimes when it really gets toxic in relationships, especially like intimate relationships, is when it's not an equal partnership, but it's one person kind of taking the brunt of everything because their default personality is to just take care of everything and to be the helper and to be the one who is always giving, and that can over time, I think, lead to some resentment that will find its way out when you feel like you're the only one doing anything, right?
2s often believe they're only valuable if they are serving other people. So the eventual message that a 2 needs to work on, the story they need to replace is actually, I'm loved for who I am. I'm not loved because I serve you and I take care of you, but I'm loved because I'm just me. I don't have to meet everybody's needs all the time. So, yeah.
That's really good.
2s are beautiful people, but
anything else to say about 2s before we go to 3?
Okay.
All right. 3 time.
3s are something. Okay. 3s are called the performer. They are success-oriented, image-conscious, and wired for productivity. They are motivated by a need to be or at least appear successful and to avoid appearing to have failed or actually have failure. 3s value appearance over substance. They often abandon their true selves to protect a false, crowd-pleasing image. 3s buy their own performance and deceive themselves into believing that they are this successful persona instead of who they really are. So,
interesting.
Like 3s make the world move. 3s.
Give me an example. What do you mean by that? 3s make the world move.
3s are, often they're salespeople, but I mean they are frequently overachievers. They tend to have careers that are very successful.
Gotcha.
Because they are driven to be seen and to be to have that persona of just hitting it out of the ballpark in every way. So
this is one of the ones that I thought I was.
Yeah.
More because often at dinner parties, Annette is, as I've been on the Enneagram journey, guessing my number.
Yes.
But I've been between 3 and the number that I'll eventually tell you that I feel like I am. We'll just keep that in suspense, so you have to keep listening. But I think the not wanting to fail is a big. I still think that. Whether it's that I'm like a 3 wing, which maybe we want to get into some of those things of like the wings or whatever, however that works. But I guess I sense that like my personality, if I fail, let's put it this way, and I would say actually what's helped me process failure more than the Enneagram has been CrossFit, because failure is part of getting better. And I always knew that, but I didn't have a really direct analogy for it, which like in CrossFit, you're going to fail any movement you learn before you figure it out. Like you're going to fail for a period of time before you figure it out. Some movements longer than others and some workouts longer than others. And so there's going to be days where you go in and you're like, I'm going to kill this workout. And then you go in and it's like, that workout killed me. and I did not finish at the time I wanted to finish. And you just feel like a failure. And so for me, whenever I would feel that feeling, it would be debilitating, right? It would be like, oh, I can't even get through today, because my mind can't get away from it. And so I know fear of failure is part of my story, whether that's something I've adopted along the way or whether that's something that just is a drive that I have. But I have a lot more healthy relationship to failure to now when I fail to say, okay, what did I learn in that failure? And so that drives me to think this isn't my personality type, more from the standpoint of as I've come to some logical ways of understanding failure, it's been easier for me to journey through that and less debilitating and also less connected to how I see myself and more connected to how I see growth. Yeah. Does that make sense? I don't know if
it does make sense. Now, the Enneagram really is very interesting tool. Within each type, there's ourselves unhealthy, there's how we can grow and become more healthy. There's the fact that in any given day, in certain areas, we could be unhealthy and then healthy and then back to unhealthy. So I say that to say a healthy 3 actually will have done work and made progress in being more comfortable with failure. Yeah. So yeah, just
So
wanted
can
to
you
throw that out
explain
there.
the wings for me? So like,
Yeah.
I know some people will talk about, and I haven't really done the work to know this. So like,
Yeah.
you're literally explaining to me because I don't know.
Yeah.
So if you're a number, but then you also have a wing,
Yes.
is the wing always a number that's next to yours?
It is always.
So it's always a number that's directly next to yours.
Either number. Yep. So I'm a 7. So my wing would either have to be a 6 or an 8.
Okay.
Which I've heard a lot of people in these,
Why is that? Why does it have to be a number directly next to yours? Because that doesn't work for mine.
I don't know the
because
answer
they
to that.
said so.
Yes, yeah. There's a lot of things about the Enneagram. I've never heard it explained why, but there are many teachers,
Gotcha.
and everyone
That the wing would be something directly next to it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
Cool.
Now, there's many different things as a person gets into the Enneagram. For each number, the Enneagram explains that, like, for instance, I am a 7. Generally speaking, when I am in health, I will go to the higher side of 5, which is not my wing, which is not beside me. But when I am not healthy, I will go to the lower side of 1. So that's a whole nother part of the Enneagram, which isn't your wings.
Oh, what's that?
So that's just what's called in stress and
So kind of fight or flight mode. When you find yourself in
Yes.
that place, you might jump to another personality.
Yep.
In
or
an unhealthy
in
way.
more like grounded, secure space. So
Gotcha.
for instance, for me being a 7, when I'm in stress, to go to the lower side of 1, I'll become more judgmental, more perfectionistic.
Gotcha.
Which I did say to you when I was preparing for this podcast because I was nervous. I went to this lower side of 1 where I was like, I have to do this perfectly. I have to have everything.
Yeah.
I have to have that. So that was
I didn't recognize that.
Yeah.
So that's a good analogy though, like that you're saying, like, so when I get stressed, I become a perfectionist. I got to have it all together.
So I say that to say
Interesting.
that is one number kind of jumping to other numbers, but this isn't wings.
But that's more happening in a situational environment, whether that's the situation of the stress that it's causing or
Yes.
Okay.
Like in Enneagram teaching, it's this notion of your number in stress and in security, grounding, centering, whatever.
Cool.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that might make more sense, whatever
Definitely.
the things you're thinking. Yeah.
Definitely, because I wouldn't say I live in that place, but I would definitely say I could jump to that place. So that's an interesting thing to consider because I hadn't even considered that. Awesome.
Yeah.
Should we go to 4?
Sure.
All right. What's 4?
4s are, and this is what my husband is, so I'm very acquainted with 4s. 4s are called the romantic. Some people call them
that worked out well for it. I'm just kidding.
But actually, the tragic romantic, frequently, to tell you the truth. So type 4s, they are creative, sensitive, moody. They are motivated by a need to be understood. They often experience oversized feelings, and they desire to avoid being ordinary. The 4s believe, this is the shadow side, 4s have an internal belief that they are missing something essential without which they will never be complete. So 4s have this feeling, I've often heard 4s described, that they're looking in the window and everybody's living and doing life, and 4s are outside the window like something's missing in me that I can't just be like everyone else.
Interesting.
And they often envy what they perceive to be wholeness and happiness in others because they just have this deep sense of they're missing what they just can't replace. So, and 4s also, it's not listed here, but 4s frequently do, the positive side of this is that they often feel like they are just very different. There's no one else like them. They're unicorns.
Sure.
Like
the Enneagram
unicorns.
unicorn.
Yes. So
I need to get Ryan a unicorn shirt.
Well, that's the big joke. At work, he's known as the unicorn.
Yeah.
People bring him Lucky Charm, unicorn Lucky Charms, unicorn Pop-Tarts.
Yeah.
Every so often something
Does
shows
his
up on
work
his desk.
know the Enneagram? Are they pulling that from that, or just is that his persona that people know?
No, he's explained it
Okay.
at Christmas. I think it started just this Christmas. He wore a unicorn ugly Christmas
Oh,
sweater.
I saw it. It was fabulous.
So he wore
great.
that, and people were like, why the unicorn? So he explained, I'm a unicorn. I'm a 4 in the Enneagram. Some people just totally bought into he's a unicorn. He's unique, and
Yeah, it's
he's
like a
kind
nickname
of
or
an
something.
interesting
It's his,
person.
Yeah.
He has multiple sides to him. He's a musician. He's an athlete. He's a trainer. It's kind of like, which one? Pick one, but not. So anyway, so some people at work are just like, you're just unique. But
Sure.
Others have become interested in the Enneagram and learn their type and all that stuff.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah.
So, what's it like being married to a 4? What are some of the challenges? I mean, Ryan would be okay with us talking about that.
Oh, yeah, totally.
Or being in a relationship to a 4.
Yeah.
Maybe. I mean, whether that's married or just in a relationship, friendship, parent, whatever. Like, I mean, you obviously know the 4 probably more closely than any other number outside of probably your own. So like,
I do try to study.
Yeah. So like what
regularly?
If someone's here and they're like, 4 kind of sounds like me, or maybe 4 is my number and I already know my number. Like what?
Yeah.
What are some unique things there about being in a relationship? Or
Well, and this I could go into at another later about how the Enneagrams affected me personally, definitely in my marriage. But 4s are considered the most complicated number on the Enneagram. Ian Cron, who is one of the teachers I've probably listened to the most, he is a 4.
Okay.
So I've heard many podcasts of 4s being interviewed, and he gives insight. And then my own husband, who did initially, when I brought to him the Enneagram, almost every 4 will be like, definitely not interested. I am so unique. I am not going to be typed. You're not going to box me in. There's no way I will fit that. So he initially, I read the book and I sat down. I'm like, let's go through every chapter. Now that I know what I am, I want to figure out what you are. And he had to sit with the descriptions for a while. He took a test, and he was equally a 4 and a 3. The performer, the achiever.
Which makes sense. Yeah.
On the outside, he presents a lot more like a 3.
Sure.
In certain ways. But when he began to read about the internal life of the 4, it really resonated. He knew that's what he is. So for me, having, my closest person being a 4, it's been really helpful to have the language of the Enneagram and to understand that 4s, that their feelings really are a little bigger than we all have feelings.
Sure.
But they are affected and somewhat driven by their feelings in a pretty large way.
Sure.
So it's interesting. I myself always thought I was driven by my feelings, actually. But what I've learned through the Enneagram is I'm actually driven by my thoughts, which that's a whole nother story of parsing out between our feelings and our thoughts.
Yeah.
But I thought I was very much a feeling-driven person. But the Enneagram has helped me discover that my number 7, I'm actually in the thought triad, which is a whole nother thing.
So we'll come back to that.
Yeah, the triads.
So triads, we probably need to cover triads, wings a little more.
And then there's something even subtypes, but that's...
Yeah, subtypes, which we might run down some of those rabbit trails. We'll see.
Yeah.
Maybe we'll just have to do an Enneagram Part 2 episode or something, because I think this is really interesting. I think a lot of people are... So and I think also coming back to with anything else to say about 4s, because I do want to also at some point talk about personally like how the Enneagram's been helpful to you, which might include a little bit of you talking about
Totally.
a 4 being married to a 7 and
Yeah.
some of the challenges that might
Oh my
present.
gosh.
Does that make sense? Like,
Oh, it presents plenty. The one last thing I want to say about the 4 before going down the 5 is that a 4's greatest need, a desire, is to be seen and known. 4's they have a hardcore need for authenticity. They just really have a hard time with a lot of the BS that a lot of us can traffic in pretty easily.
Yeah.
4's they have a core need to be authentic. So that's super important.
Would you say it's hard for a 4 to be like part of like a corporate facade where they have to like buy into like we do it this way because this is what the man says, or like I'm not trying to like set up a straw man situation. I'm just saying like the idea of being corporate is something that tends to remove the uniqueness of the individual, right? And so that could be something that a 4 might find themselves part of a corporation or part of something like that.
Right.
And I would even apply that to like church. They might be part of a church that has a particular theology, that has a particular way of seeing things, and you have to buy into only seeing it this way. And the moment you begin to say, hold on, I think I see it a little differently, and you're trying to remove the unique way that I'm seeing it from my personhood, that could be a far more emotional process for a 4 to go through than maybe for a 1 or a 2 to go through.
Absolutely.
Is that a fair way of like, because it's not that
Yeah.
a 1, 2, 3, and 4 might all go through that process. It's that the 4 may feel that process emotionally very different than one of the other numbers might, which this is, I think, where the Enneagram becomes very helpful, is that can be a internal civil war of sorts for all people, no matter what number you're on. If you're going through that, like, hold on, I'm not sure if I can deny this part of myself. And that brings about a whole lot of emotions, but recognizing that a 4 feels those emotions in a far more intense way than the other numbers. This is where you begin to have empathy when someone who's a 4 is really struggling to walk the party line, or the, you know, because for them it's a far more emotional process. So I think that's a good, it's just one more, I think, visual for people to understand, okay, I'm starting to see how some of this applies to real life situations that we might find ourselves in.
Absolutely. Yep.
Okay.
Totally.
So the 5, go ahead.
Yes. The 5 is frequently called the investigator. They are analytical, detached, and private. They are motivated by a need to gain knowledge, conserve energy, and avoid relying on others. The 5s often hoard those things that they believe will ensure they can live an independent, self-sustained existence. This withholding ultimately can lead to their holding back love and affection from others. 5s are very data driven.
Okay.
They get safety out of information and research.
So just to be clear, we just left a type in 4 that seems to be very emotionally driven. And 5, would you argue, is more logical driven or logically driven?
Analytical.
Analytical? Okay.
Huh.
Yet they could be wings of each other in an odd way.
In fact, someone that I know you've recently met, but Michael Gungor is a 5 with a 4 wing.
Really?
I know.
Interesting.
I don't know him, but when I listen to him talk about it, I'm like, no, you must be a 4. But out of his own, when he talks about the Enneagram, because he's a big fan, he is a 5. And his friend Science Mike, who is a 9, said that when they tour together, frequently 5s, more so than any other numbers, just have a limited energy for social interaction. Like there is truly a cutoff.
I actually sensed that when I had met Michael at Q Conference. They had a line of people greeting them, and you could tell, I don't know, I get a sense of when people are like tired or, you know, emotionally, and I'm not saying he was tired. Like,
Yeah.
I don't want to put that
Yeah.
on him. Like,
Right.
but maybe he was fine. But like, I sensed that, and I could see how that could come out of this. Whereas,
I mean, Science Mike talks about it. He'll be like, suddenly Michael Gungor has disappeared, and
Sure.
but fives really, it's actually a real thing for fives. That I've heard it explained many times that there is actually just a limit, that it's not imagined.
yeah,
There's
there's a legitimate like,
Yeah, it's just
I don't have
time.
the capacity to do this anymore.
Yeah.
Almost like
Yeah.
you might work a 12-hour shift and be like, I can't work anymore. Like there's a limit to social interaction.
Yep.
Would you say fives tend to be more I don't want to say withdrawn. What's the language I'm looking for?
Introverted?
Introverted. That's what I was looking for.
Yeah, the Enneagram doesn't use the terms introverted and extroverted
Okay.
a lot. I almost never hear it. But so much about fives do seem like
They would
generally
trend that
gonna-
direction.
yes.
And by the way, we keep saying Science
Yeah.
Mike and Michael Gungor. We're referencing, as she referenced earlier, the Liturgists podcast, which I'll put a link to that in the show notes. Those are two of the individuals on the Liturgists podcast, and Science Mike also has his own podcast. But yeah, great.
Yeah.
Okay, so anything else about the investigator? They're knowledge driven.
Yeah, I mean, you want a 5 on your team because they will research,
Yeah.
bring data, not be emotional. They can, every number can bring just some really great strengths, and a 5 definitely will come at a situation as objectively as possible.
So, did you listen to episode 1 of the podcast? Of this podcast, if you didn't, that's fine. It was the
I
one
did.
the one with Nate McConkey on
yeah.
evolution. I'm
Yeah.
pretty confident Nate's a 5. Like, if he's not, I'd be shocked.
Right, right.
And I mean, I'm not going to try to
Yeah.
typecast him. I'm just saying, like, maybe I don't know if he's heard of the Enneagram, what he thinks about the Enneagram.
Yeah.
I would also guess that, like, the investigators might be the skeptical ones about the Enneagram. Oh, yeah, sure, the Enneagram. Yeah, tell me
I mean,
more.
definitely
Good luck.
4s
Yeah.
are like, they constantly are like, don't box me in.
Well, 4s are
But-
more probably from a position of like, I'm too unique to be typecasted.
Absolutely.
Whereas a 5 might be like, I question the whole legitimacy of
Absolutely.
this snake oil Enneagram
Yes.
business. Like, does that make sense?
Totally.
Like,
In fact, because we brought up Science Mike is a big fan of the Enneagram, but he will say there is nothing scientific about the Enneagram, and yet it is uncanny in its how applicable it is and how spot on it is, even though it is not scientific. So that's its own thing. He's not a 5, but
Yeah.
but he's very scientific.
yeah.
So, so fives have a lot of great things to bring, but
Would you think the 5s trend toward like the science work though? Like because of research? Because
you would
they're
think
so
so.
logical?
I mean, a lot of the experts that I listen to and the people they have on, the one thing about the Enneagram is there can be trends in numbers for sure.
Yeah.
For sure. But because it's all the internal and not the external behavior, you really can find people of all numbers doing all things, such as Michael Gungor being a 5. Mm-hmm. Whereas like a lot of 4s can tend to be artistic, but that doesn't mean every artist is a 4.
Yeah. Very interesting. So I'm looking here at an example of an Enneagram type 5 on the EnneagramInstitute.com,
That's a good source.
which is a great source to go check out if you just want to dive into things. They'll also give you individuals who are different types.
Okay.
So individuals who are type 5, Albert Einstein.
Oh, goodness.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
And there's quite a few kind of science-y type people under here.
Okay.
You've got It's funny because they also do like characters from TV shows.
Yes.
So like House, like
Yes.
Dr. Gregory
Yeah.
House is a 5.
I could
like,
see that.
Of course.
Yeah.
Fox Mulder from X-Files is a 5. I get that if you're
I don't
into
know that one. Yeah.
But what's crazy is there's a ton of artists
Okay.
that are 5s. So, I mean, if you don't know, Gungor is a band, and so like there's artistry there. So here's some. Vincent van Gogh.
Oh, okay.
That's interesting, right?
Yeah.
Bill Gates is too, and Mark Zuckerberg are both 5s, which makes sense from a logical, like very scientific, way of. But then Kurt Cobain,
Okay.
lead singer of Nirvana, is a 5.
Okay.
I would have never guessed that.
Actually, I've heard some. I mean, Enneagram teachers can disagree. I have heard people. Ian Cron says Cobain was a 4.
Really?
So see,
well,
that's
he's a
not
performer.
That's not self identifying. It's other people.
It's other people identifying based on knowledge that they have from whatever.
And one of the cardinal rules of the Enneagram is you're
don't tell
never
other
supposed
people.
to type other people. But meanwhile, everyone does.
Well, and the fact that he says a 4, it's not that much disagreement when you have a wing one way or the other. Does that make sense?
Exactly.
So,
No, it does.
But like Trent Reznor, who's the lead singer of Nine Inch Nails,
Okay.
Tom York, who's the lead singer of Radiohead.
Wow.
Very interesting when you dive into some of these people. So
Yeah.
So like analytical people, but also artists
Yeah.
who Stephen King even. Wow, interesting. Very interesting.
Yeah.
All right, let's move on to number
Okay.
6.
Number 6. What's interesting about 6 is most Enneagram teachers do believe that on average half of the world are actually 6s.
Half of the world.
Like half of the world's population. So that
What?
Yeah.
I've never heard that.
Yeah, I've heard that in a number of different from a number of different people. So
That's
it's
awesome.
not like anything on the Enneagram. It's not exact and it's not data, but it's a predominant thought. So
Well, let's hear what 6 is, and then let's get into why that might be, because I'd love to
Yes.
hear more about why that might be.
So 6s are called the loyalist by some. They are committed, practical, and witty. They often think in worst case scenario ways. They are motivated by fear and a need for security. 6s forever are imagining worst case scenarios and questioning their ability to handle life on their own. 6s turn to authority figures and belief systems rather than God to provide them with the support and security they long for. So 6s have a lot of fear and truly are driven for safety and security.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
And there's an argument that half of the world might be represented in that.
Yes. So their core desire is to have security, guidance, and support. Yeah.
Interesting. That's awesome.
Yeah.
I would have never guessed that there was such a large contingent of one number, or a theory that there was such a large contingent of one number.
Well, this point gets brought up a lot in our present political situation.
Give me an example.
Just that we're so polarized because people are clinging to
So loyal to one side and
to
not,
a system
Okay.
instead of
Gotcha.
what's right, what might need to be worked out, what might need to be nuanced. It's like, no, I want security, so I'm just going to grab this thing because this side, this camp, this party, because it will give me safety. I'll belong. And
Gotcha.
Instead of the difficulty of, this party has some positives, that party has some positives, this one has some negatives,
Gotcha.
instead of how hard that can be.
So does a loyalist often then, would a loyalist be more likely to find themselves in an echo chamber that just constantly tells them what they already believe? Is that a likely scenario that you might find yourself in if you're a 6?
Yep.
Okay.
When this description had mentioned twice that 6s often think worst case scenario.
Yeah.
I've often heard on different podcasts when 6s are being interviewed. I mean, the truth is we need 6s in the world. We need people keeping us safe, thinking about
worst case.
What could happen.
Yeah.
So there's, a beautiful side to that. The heart of wanting to see sixes be able to get past all those fears and living kind of burdened down by that is for an authentic, free self who would be able to live in this world and see what they see, but not be as driven by the fear. So
I feel like of all the ones so far, this one seems borderline, like almost like the fact that there might be half the world that is this number. Mm-hmm. Do you think that has to do, and this may be something you've never even considered or has never been talked about, has to do with almost like an evolutionary reality of like needing to be afraid or needing to plan for the worst case scenario?
Sure.
Because that is in a lot of ways a survivalistic tendency of like, we need to be safe. We need to plan for the worst. Like, we need to, I don't know if you've ever watched The Croods, but the idea, it's like this kid's movie, but my kids watch it. And like when they're watching it, I always laugh because I've actually never watched the movie, but it's on in the van and I can hear the narrative happening in the back. You know what I mean? It's on in the minivan as we're driving and I can hear the whole narrative. And the whole narrative is there's this like the main character dad who's Nicolas Cage, does an amazing voiceover. You can tell right away it's him when you're driving in the car and listening to it. But anyway, his whole narrative is like, we don't leave the cave because the cave is safe.
Exactly. That is totally
and I'm like,
yeah.
I'm pretty sure Nicolas Cage in this movie is a 6, but like he's a 6 because like evolutionarily speaking, he's like, we don't leave the cave because there's dangers outside of the cave. Like, whereas, you know, you're going to have some of these more, as we get into some of these other numbers that are going to really push back against the idea that we don't leave the cave.
Totally. Yes. The 6s, their core weakness is anxiety.
Yeah.
Constantly scanning and preparing for worst case scenarios.
Okay.
And then the message that a 6 longs to hear, that their heart longs to hear, is that you are safe. So a friend of mine once said that someone they loved way back at the beginning of their relationship had said, I just want someone to take care of me. And that's very much a 6 predominant thought, is just not because they're
not
lazy,
in like a selfish or lazy way. Yeah,
just as far as like
yeah.
safety and security.
I want to be safe. I want to be secure.
Yeah,
that's
which really all of us want that. I mean, it's part of...
Yeah, but some of us are willing to suspend that for another value. Like, I think it's more ordering of values, right? Like, because it could be that the highest value to you is safety and security. And so, like, I need to find that before I can pursue other things. Whereas other people might be like, I can go without safety and security for a little bit as long as, like, this value of helping others is there. Right. Like, because that's my, or whatever it might be, right?
I mean, I'm a 7 with a 6 wing. So I identify that I'm not dominant 6. And
but you
when
understand
we get to 7s, I totally do. And it's in me. Like understanding the 6 helps me understand myself.
So like staying in the cave, there's been times where you've been like, let's stay in the cave, guys.
Yeah.
Or no.
Well, it's hard because I'm a 7.
Yeah.
So that 7s are aggressive. And the aggressive stance, which is a whole nother Enneagram thing, stances. Yeah. And 6s, I believe, stances I'm kind of new to, but 6s are in the dependent stance.
Gotcha.
So anyway, that's
interesting.
Its own thing.
Should we go right into 7? Because as we're kind of talking about it with 6, it's probably natural to
right
just
into 7.
Go right into it. And this is your type, so you got to speak
type.
very...
7s. So type 7s are often called the enthusiast. We are fun, spontaneous, and adventurous, very much motivated by a need to be happy and to plan stimulating experiences and to avoid pain at all costs. That would be emotional and psychological pain. 7s, in order to avoid painful feelings, 7s often gorge themselves on positive experiences, planning and anticipating new adventures, and entertaining interesting ideas. Never satisfied, the 7's frenzied pursuit of these distractions eventually escalates to the point of gluttony. So, good times.
Oh, wow.
That's what it says.
Isn't there a way that they sometimes attach a sin to each of the...
yes, I'm actually reading the
gluttony,
sins.
Gluttony would be
gluttony,
for this one? Interesting.
Yeah. I'm as part of this description, I'm reading the type description, and I've added in the sins.
Okay.
But I didn't differentiate that.
Interesting.
But yes, 7 is gluttony, and obviously it's not just food. It's a gluttonous behavior for positive, for whatever will feel positive and good and happy.
Don't want to deal with negative emotions.
Definitely. Nope.
Don't want to work through those realities, whether they're in our world and they're things that exist and they're things that we should be processing collectively. I don't want to process it. I don't want to.
Collectively or individually.
Yeah, or individually. Yeah. One of the things about this while you were reading that I was kind of giggling about is like plan stimulating experiences. Yes. I'm like, oh my gosh, that's totally Annette. So Annette is constantly trying to get like everybody together and every like whether it's like at one of like every Monday morning when she looks at her calendar, it's like Brittany and I get a text and it's like, so I'm going to be here on Friday and here on Saturday, whether it's like Ryan's gig or usually it's Ryan's gig or it's like a deck party at the house or something. Like you are.
I live for those things.
Yeah. Well, and let me say this though, like it's amazing because like I would say, and I don't know if this is true of most 7s, but it's definitely true of you. Like there's a gift of hospitality. I would guess most of our 7s have a gift of hospitality and like they want to get people together or they want to have these experiences where everybody's.
Yes and no.
Togetherness, maybe.
Yes.
Maybe that's just you. I don't know.
Yeah. It's funny because some of the people that I have found to be the most hospitable people have often been 2s.
Because they're
some
helper.
2s in my lives. Yeah. For me, I'm a gatherer of people.
Maybe
but
that's
actually,
the way of saying it.
But actually, like for me, hospitality includes many things, but definitely like food preparation and the aesthetic. And I am all about the people.
Yeah.
And the vibe of the people. So
maybe gather is definitely a better term. But I guess what I'm trying to say is like there's a warmth in that gathering that you facilitate, that you create, that you desire to bring about, I guess, which I think has been something that's like it's super awesome. It was awesome when like Brittany and I were invited into that when we became friends and like you're constantly trying to introduce us to your friends, but then we've also seen friends that you've made along the way since we've kind of become friends with you that get like introduced and you're very aware of like, so, hey, let me tell you about so-and-so. So-and-so is this type of person. And you're like trying to introduce them. And it's almost like you grab them and you're like, I'm your guide tonight. I'm going to take you around, make sure you get to know everybody. And like, you're enthusiastic because you're like almost like journeying through all these new relationships with them. And it's like, oh, I'm so excited because you're feeling all these happy emotions and I get to feel them with you.
That is totally a 7. That is totally a 7. 7s frequently can be often known as the life of the party. They tend to be funny and energized. And as myself as a 7, I'm like, I'm not always the funniest person in the room or necessarily the life of the party. But kind of the way you've described, I've realized that's who I am at the party, which is this positive vibe thing. But a lot of 7s can tend to be like they truly described as the life of the party. So
the negative way it might present itself, like let's just say you're in a relationship with a 7. We'll just say for the sake of this, like an intimate marriage relationship, and you're having to go through some difficult emotions or process. Let's just say you're a parent, you're having to process a child who's going through some really hard, difficult things, and it's negative emotions that you're having to process in your child or negative behaviors you're having to process in your child. Does a 7 typically try to kind of just escape that, deny that? Oh, that's not happening, or it's happening, but
and
here's the silver bullet fix, and we're not going to actually really have to work through it. Like we're not going to have to. I don't want to feel these emotions. Is that kind of the typical roadmap?
Yep. This description didn't include it, but 7s constantly will reframe a situation into the most positive way possible because it avoids the pain.
Okay.
Rob Bell's a 7.
Is Bob Goff a 7?
Bob Goff's totally a 7.
Bob Goff, I was like,
Yes.
he's gotta be a 7. I'm sitting here
and
like...
the people, Richard Rohr, Ian Cron, these guys, they all say like Rob Bell and Bob Goff are like very healthy 7s.
Okay.
But Rob Bell says all the time, his drug of choice has always been denial. And like as a fellow 7, it's like, yes, that's part of the story. My own story of why the Enneagram's been so helpful has been really recognizing a lot of these behaviors that I just reframed just for a long time, a couple decades.
Yeah.
Just saw myself, saw my life experience, and saw it in a certain way. But in order to make the next steps of growth and health, I had to learn to. Ian Cron says he has a son who's a 7. He said, sometimes we have to talk to our 7s, or if you're a 7, talk to yourself. And kind of like you would to a puppy, you have to say, stay. Okay. Something hard has come. Stay. And I actually say that to myself. I'm like, Annette, stay in the pain. Don't move. Just like I talk to my dog.
That's so good.
So,
that's so good because like here's a tangible way that's helping you. Like you're so used to like denial.
Yep.
And now you're moving
Escape.
toward acceptance.
Yeah.
Sit with this.
Yeah.
Process it, not try to find a silver bullet or a silver lining that I can just lean on and move forward, but actually like embrace this difficult thing that I have to work through and then get to the other side in a healthy way instead of in a I'm going to close my eyes and pretend it's not here
100%.
and get to the other side. So that do you find that it gets easier to journey through those negative emotions as you go through that way, or is it?
I mean, I've been trying to do a lot of work for probably now the better part of 5 years to do that.
Yeah.
So life has helped that, and then the knowledge of things like the Enneagram and therapy and different tools. A horrible tragedy happened to my family 6 years ago. My nephew had a tragic accident, was killed. And that was a situation I could not reframe. There's just no reframing it. There's just not. So on one hand, that was one of the first experiences in my life that it just couldn't be reframed. It could not be made positive inherently. It couldn't be glossed over. It was just darkness and pain and tragedy. So an experience like that, I kind of ran into that experience. Not necessarily, I didn't know the Enneagram at that point, and I was starting to work on myself. But that was almost like a jolt because I recognized like this can't be reframed. So
yeah, that's hard. That's
kind of an extreme example.
Well, it is an extreme example, but I think again, it's a really good. People have dealt with tragedy who are listening to this right now and have found out a lot about themselves as they've journeyed through that tragedy, right? Like we tend to find out a lot about ourselves as we're put in stressful situations, and tragic situations are sometimes the most stressful, often the most stressful.
Yeah.
So much of these characteristics that we're talking about within the Enneagram or these types are how we respond to stress, how we respond to fear, how we respond to the negative in the world or the negative that we journey through. And so for you having to go through that and no longer being able to put a positive spin on it, it's like, I can't find the positive in this. Like, it does seem to me like enthusiasts have high highs and low lows.
Oh yeah. Well, because of the wanting to deny and just avoid is the word, totally avoid emotional and psychological pain. that the idea, often what happens is just this frenzied attempt for keep the positive, keep the stimulating, keep the happy. And we'll get to that later, but that's what's so interesting about my marriage, which is a 7 and a 4, because 4s just in how they view the world, how they view reality, are just much more comfortable with even melancholy. Yeah. So to have a person who can sit Shiva, that Hebrew
sitting Shiva, which is
where you sit with someone in pain and you don't try to fix it, and you don't try to reframe it, and you don't try to...
You don't even talk
your way. Yes.
You don't even talk
at all.
You just sit there.
So...
That's terrible for a 7. That's like literally torture for a 7, right? Like, is that fair? Like,
it certainly is. So, having tried to do a lot of hard work, and some days being able to have had some growth, I've had to teach myself and learn how to sit Shiva. And even my daily work can involve that, depending on the day and what's going on. But then life can as well.
Do we want to move on to 8s?
Sure.
All right. What is the 8s?
8s has been a big deal in my life, too, in a really helpful way. Okay, so 8s are called the Challenger. And this flipped me over. Pause mine. Okay, 8s are, some people call it, all the different teachers can use different words.
Yeah, so but they're the same basic idea.
Yeah, same basic idea, yeah. And a lot of them, even Ian said he doesn't love assigning the name per se, but it often helps people, especially when they're first new to the Enneagram, to be like, okay, performer, investigator, just get a general idea. So type 8s are called the Challengers. They are commanding, intense, and confrontational. They are motivated by a need to be strong and avoid feeling weak or vulnerable. 8s lust after intensity. It can be seen in the excessiveness they evidence in every area of their life. They can be domineering and confrontational. 8s present a hard, intimidating exterior to mask a vulnerable inside.
I'm an 8.
We guessed that so long ago, even though you're never allowed to do that.
Took a while to come to grips with it, because that's not necessarily a description that anyone wants to hear about themselves, or at least that's what they say. If you don't want to hear it about yourself,
it's probably
that's probably you.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's definitely me. I mean,
there's so much beautiful about 8s.
Sure.
Let's say that. Yes.
What are those things? Tell me those again. No.
Healthy 8s are world changers because they're not afraid of bullies.
Yeah.
8s are not intimidated by, for lack of a better word, bullies. Yeah. Healthy 8s are passionate for the marginalized and will stick up for those that are being oppressed and abused.
I want to say someone said MLK's in 8.
That's been the guess.
That would be the guess, right?
Yep, absolutely.
Because he's a challenger, obviously, like the challenging a system.
Yep.
So 8s in their health can be working toward people in the margins. They can also work toward power in negative ways, I would guess, too, because power seems to be a little bit of an element of an 8, right?
Yes.
Like
8s will often describe that they walk into a room and they can't help but try to notice who's in control here.
What's so funny is you shared that with me at like a dinner we were having, and I was like, crap. I do that every time. I can't walk into a room and not be like, who's in control? Like, and what I mean by that is like, if I go to, let's say I go to, okay, so me being in the church community, for example, there's been a number of like random events I get invited to or something. And let's say I go to an event that's like being put together by somebody, and I walk into the event that I've been invited to or whatever, and I walk into the event and it's clear that like something's gone wrong or things aren't going well
Yep.
or, like whatever, any number of things are going wrong.
Yeah.
And it's clear that like whoever's in control it's not working or whatever.
Yep.
Like Brittany's completely unaware of that. My wife. Okay. Like I'm fully aware of it and can't take my mind off of it.
Yep.
And I'm aware that like this person is in charge, but they're not having a good day.
Yep.
Like, or I'm aware of it from the standpoint of like, do I need to help right now? Like, do I need to get involved? Do I need to like help? Like,
and that's a strength of an 8. That an 8, so many of us would just be like, not maybe see that any of those things at all. Or if we saw them, just be like, it's not my place.
my problem.
But an 8 is just so much more up for the challenge.
But I've also learned that you have to be careful in those places because you can also overstep as an 8 because that intensity can take away opportunities from other people.
Yeah.
Because sometimes those people need the failure of that moment or that moment of stress or that moment of not knowing what they're doing and actually going through that for the betterment of experience, right? But sometimes I think an 8 can swoop in and be like, I'll save the day.
Totally. My son is an 8, my middle son, Shane. And that's another story, how helpful understanding 8s has really transformed my relationship with him. And I won't go into that too deeply, but his first grade teacher said to me at a parent-teacher conference, she was like, I just love having this kid in my class. It's basically like having another adult. He gets sarcasm. He just walks into the room and says, if kids are just kind of being kids and sitting around, he's like, okay, you need to go do this. You go take care of this. Not in just a stereotypically bossy way, but it's just who he's always been, that he walks into a room, and he's not even the biggest kid on the block. I mean, he's somewhat shorter in stature, or he is, but it's his natural inclination that he walks in and yes, there's a lot of negatives about that, but there's a lot of positives, and we need people like that in the world. And again, it's even part of God's character of God is a challenger. God, I mean, sometimes depending on what way you're looking at it, God absolutely challenges humans in the way that we operate and what we're doing, and just flips that upside down. So it can be a really great characteristic.
Taking command of a room is something an 8. No one has to teach an 8 how to do that.
No, not at all.
Is what I guess I'm saying. Like,
totally.
Whereas, like, as a leader who's had to lead other staff or interns, there's been times where I've been like, "Hey, you're in charge.
Yeah.
When you're at the mic, you got to take command of the room. Yeah. You're not taking command of the room. Everyone's nervous for you. That's not command. Like, you have to exude a certain amount of confidence. And so let's talk about what that means. Yeah. You can't be twitching like you're scared when you're in front of everyone. You don't have to tell an 8 that cue, because an 8 is like, I'm not afraid. Why would I be afraid? I'm not afraid of anything.
That's the thing that. I'm a 7, and I was like, am I an 8 wing or a 6? Oh, definitely a 6. I really appreciate 8s and what they bring to the table. Part of the story that an 8 adopts early in childhood is that they need to take control in order to be safe.
Okay.
So the fear of the 8 is being weak, being powerless, being harmed, being controlled by others, being manipulated, and being at the mercy of injustice. Like, that's one person's description of the core fear. The core desire is to protect oneself. And it says it can deteriorate into constant fighting and conflicts, because depending on how that goes. The self-image of an 8. Never known that reality. The self-image of an 8 can be outspoken, direct, opinionated, bold, decisive, tough, and compassionate.
Yeah.
The compassionate part's the important part, I think, to remember. As being a woman and being, pro-women, one thing when I hear people talk about 8s is that women who are 8s have an especially tough road to hoe.
Yeah.
Because often they're just considered
The worst.
Yeah.
Well, the worst,
Female
and I'm
dogs.
saying that
Yeah.
in obviously like
It's
air
not
quotes,
true.
like the
Right,
worst.
exactly,
Like,
right.
like
Yeah.
I think, and I say that because like my daughter's an 8.
Yeah.
Like I'm confident Magnolia's an 8. Like
Yeah.
there's no way she's not.
Right.
And I say that more from the standpoint of like she challenges everything, and not the way like a kid challenges things. Kids challenge things, but I mean she will find things to challenge that you're like, why? What are we doing?
Absolutely.
And like I realize now when my parents would tell me the way I would challenge things too, I'm like, oh man, it comes around full circle. So but I also look at it and I'm like, man, you're entering into a world where you're lucky because it'll likely be very more open to powerful women who can challenge, right? Like she's definitely entering into history at a very different time than it would have been 50 years ago for her to enter in with her personality. But you can certainly see the stereotype of how women might get typecast as a certain type of person or certain negatives attached to them because so much of their personality is this, whereas a man, it could almost be seen as an endearing
masculine.
quality.
Yep.
Look at you. Like look at how
a great leadership.
Yeah. You're so
quality.
great. And the moment you apply that to a woman, it can be all kinds of negative things instead of like you can quickly see the negative instead of seeing
on
the
a
positive.
consistent basis. When I've heard female 8s tell their stories, that's what they often.
Especially if you go into the
who's an
corporate
8?
world, probably too. Like
There, someone who's an 8 who has been able to navigate that is Nadia Boltz-Weber.
Oh yeah. That's crazy. She's an 8, huh?
Yes.
That makes a lot of sense. I mean, she's definitely a challenger. Her most recent book that just came out is challenging a lot of things. What's the name of that book? Just to give it a
Shameless,
plug.
I believe.
Shameless. That's right. Yeah, I haven't read it yet. Are you reading it? Or are you going to read it?
I haven't read it yet. I want to.
Yeah, I'll probably read it. But it's definitely challenging our views of sex within our context.
And even the fact that she's
that's
female
a huge
pastor
challenging. A female pastor with tattoos and
obviously.
Which obviously I'm a pastor with tattoos and earrings. There's some. I think we don't have a problem challenging status quo. It wouldn't surprise me if Steve Jobs was an 8. Like I don't know if he was an 8, but like the idea of like challenging the status quo, of like pushing back against like why does it have to be that way? Like one of the things I ask all the time when someone tells me it's this way, I'm like, why? Why does it have to be that way?
That's very,
Like, why? Like, don't tell me don't tell me we're doing this because we've done it the last 3 years. Tell me we're doing this because there's a reason this needs to be done than, like, tradition.
Yeah.
I'm the last way to convince me to do anything is because of tradition. Now, I'll say this. In my family, my wife's very big on tradition. Mm-hmm. So, in the sense of, like, we have this certain traditions. We cut down a Christmas tree every year. We do these other things.
Right. Yeah.
Those types of traditions that are more like emotional and family, I'm very open to. Mm-hmm. Traditions that seem to keep us locked into a pattern and way of doing things that's not helpful or not open to new ideas are things that I absolutely like loathe.
And
I'll do them sometimes.
That's the gift
but
of the
I'm like, why?
Yeah.
Why are we staying in the cave?
Yeah.
Yes, maybe we're safe in the cave, but maybe we're missing out on all kinds of new opportunities.
Absolutely.
And I'm always leaning on, let's take the risk for the likelihood that there might be something better. Like that's just my mindset of like, so safety and risk, I'm more likely to lean toward risk in my 8-ness, I guess.
Yep.
I don't know.
And I briefly mentioned stances. Obviously, the 8 is in the aggressive stance. So
fun. Everybody wants to hear that about themselves. Again, these labels. No, I'm just kidding.
Yes, exactly. That's the crazy part.
No, I understand.
Yeah, it's
aggressive because it is aggressive to say, no, the status quo is not okay. That's an aggressive thing to say. It's an aggressive thing to just the idea of challenging something is aggressive.
Well, what's interesting is so the 7s, 8s, and 9s were on the aggressive stance, I said that wrong. Sorry. Aggressive stance.
8 and 9?
Oh, I was wrong.
No, you're okay. Go ahead.
Sorry. Aggressive stance is 3, 7, and 8. I apologize. So when we talk about stances, there's many things to talk about. There's the wings, there's subtypes, there's stances. But one level and part of the Enneagram is stances. The aggressive stance are the 3s, the 7s, and the 8s. But we're aggressive for different reasons.
Gotcha.
For instance, an 8 is aggressive for the reasons we're talking about. A 7 is aggressive because I will aggressively seek to avoid difficult things, versus an 8 will aggressively walk right in and enter in
and take control and power.
It's still aggressiveness,
yeah.
but it's different.
So a 7 will aggressively assert a positive outlook on the emotion, the negative emotion that they don't want to feel, or they'll aggressively run away. Yeah. But I'm saying, like, the outcome or the reasoning is very different. The motivation is very different. What's the sin for an 8? Like because we talked about how sins are attached to all of them. Would it be like anger?
It's called lust.
Lust, okay. Like lust for power maybe, or control?
Exactly, yeah.
Okay.
Actually, Ian says lust for intensity. So,
intensity, okay.
So obviously, kind of like gluttony wasn't just food.
Sure.
Lust is not sexual. It's intensity.
Okay.
And that's one thing from very young in his toddler years. My son, Ryan, and I would be like, Shane is just an intense person. He just came out of the womb intense, which is interesting because the Enneagram believes we adopt and take on our personality types. But from very young, Shane, there was one day when he was only like 18 months or 2 years old, and we had taken something from him. We were still house parents at the Milton Hershey School. He went
That's a good detail, by the way. You guys were house parents at the Milton Hershey School.
For 7 years. We were full-time house parents. The whole beginning part of our marriage, which the Enneagram really would have helped us understand each other back then. Anyway, youth. Shane, he went back into our apartment and he took a dozen of eggs and just smashed them one by one. So anyway, that's an example where we say from a very young age, Shane just sort of did things on a more intense level. That's just a little example.
No, that's that's good. And I would actually argue the same for Magnolia. She's been pretty intense, maybe not since day one, but like definitely has an intensity about her, a fieriness about her.
Yeah.
So you just mentioned something before we go into 9. You had mentioned like they take on a persona or whatever. There's the understanding of like nature and nurture. Mm-hmm. It seems as if most Enneagram people are arguing for more of a nurture stance, or maybe not a nurture stance, but a environmental stance that leads to your personality being discovered, or your personality type. I'm curious what you think about that.
Yeah. Without parsing it out super like detail, I actually in everyone I've listened to and the 2 books I've read, it really does seem like it does. The language sounds very much nurture, but people often, when they're being interviewed on podcasts, they will ask, and it does seem like the nature part of we have these propensities towards the reason we gravitate towards what is in our environment and what's around us. There does seem to be a component also of the nature, not just the nurtures. And I would say, just from my opinion, it does seem to be like 50-50. So
sure. I think you can't, I don't know. I think you can't make it all nurture. Like there has to be a nature element. Like I honestly see so much of so much of myself in my daughter, to where I'm like, wow, this is like the genes clearly got handed to you of like leader and like going in and taking charge, like and not being afraid of the bully. Like she's totally, like when you gave that analogy, I thought of myself, but I also thought of her. Like she's so not scared in those situations. So
Yeah.
interesting. So the 8
Yeah.
is the challenger. All right.
Yes.
What is the 9, the last number?
The 9, which actually is on the top of the Enneagram, and different Enneagram teachers say they do believe the 9. No number is better than another number, which is funny in dinner conversation. A lot of times 1s or 3s will be like, well, which is the best number? Because I would like to work towards being that number. There is no best number, which is another thing I love about the Enneagram, is that it's another reminder that we are all broken and we all need mercy and grace, and that we all have areas of weakness and we all have areas of strength, and it's just, to me, a level playing field.
And not one of us is better than another.
No.
It's more that we just have different things
Absolutely.
we're working through and different ways of processing.
Type, you would not want a world full of any one type.
No.
It would be horrific.
Yeah.
But to have a representation, a spectrum of the 9 different types makes a beautiful, complicated, but varied world, which is what we want to live in and what we need. And again, some have said you can see 9 different characteristics of God, knowing that God isn't just the creator, but he is also perfect. He is a perfectionist, but he's also a helper and a servant. So okay, so type 9 is called the peacemaker. They are pleasant, laid back, and accommodating. They are motivated by a need to keep the peace, to merge with others, and to avoid conflict. For 9s, their deadly sin can be considered sloth. Sloth refers not to physical sloth, but to spiritual laziness. 9s can fall asleep to their own priorities, their own personal development and responsibility, and for becoming their own person. So 9s, more than others, can tend to just fall asleep to their own personal, deep inner life. But 9s, one of the most incredible things about 9s is that they have the ability to see both sides legitimately. Science Mike is a 9. They can sit in a room with a debate going on, and they can truly get behind either side as far as understanding. Not whatever side they personally believe would be different, but that's why they're the peacemakers. They're able to not just be locked in to understanding their way, but they can truly see, I understand why this person is feeling that way. And in the same scenario, this person seeing the other.
So the 9 would be probably the first one to champion like reconciliation and forgiveness.
Absolutely. Yep.
Because when I hear so I'm not sure which wing I am. I don't think I'm an enthusiast. I just don't think I am. I'm certainly very quick to champion reconciliation and forgiveness, and I have a peace position theologically even, so like being a peacemaker is definitely a part of my story. I would say the idea of avoiding conflict is literally not something I consider. Like I think that's probably where my challenger standpoint drives me.
The dominant.
I mean, there's times where I avoid conflict more from the standpoint of I just don't want to deal with this. Like this is a waste of time. Or I just don't want to deal with another meeting where we try to, fix this problem or whatever, but not from a standpoint of I'm afraid of conflict.
Right. I've heard 9s describe, it's interesting. So they will avoid conflict. I myself, as a 7, will avoid pain. My reasons for avoiding pain is different than a 9 avoiding conflict. A 9 would avoid, an unhealthy 9, avoid conflict by nature because they want peace. Peace is the priority. Peace for themselves, peace for others. So conflict, you entering into conflict takes work. It takes often negotiation and even though they have a gift for that, when properly harnessed, an unhealthy 9 will just literally, a lot of 9s say, and I've heard Ian even say, like, truthfully, go to sleep figuratively, but even go to sleep literally, because it's just, there's no peace. And they are truly just at home in peace.
And I guess the negative would be almost like a fake peace that, not a fake peace, but a peace that they get to experience while others maybe are experiencing conflict.
Yeah.
Because they don't necessarily work through the things that maybe need to be challenged.
Yeah.
Is that fair? Mm-hmm. So if you're a 9, is your wing a 1 or an 8 then? Mm-hmm. Okay, just wanted to make sure. So it goes rounds up to that. So okay, I see.
Yep.
What else about a 9? Anything else you wanted to share?
On a 9, so their core fears are being in conflict, being loveless, being shut out, being discordant, overlooked, or inharmonious. So those are core fears. Their desires is to have inner stability and peace of mind.
Interesting.
Like that's...
I feel like a lot of recent presidents have been 9s. Like I think like Ronald Reagan, if I remember correctly.
They
and
say
like
Bill Clinton.
George Bush and Bill Clinton.
Say,
and I even think like John F. Kennedy, someone said was a 9. Like, is it just that
I've
they
heard
have...
a lot of presidents.
They have a way of like... finding the peaceful, it's more of like a diplomatic position, right? Like you're a diplomat if you're a peacemaker in some ways, right? Because you're able to you're able to find you're able to thread the needle, if you will, to the. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Cool.
Yeah. I have heard that numerous experts have said it has been very strong in presidents. So.
Because you'd think like a president would be like either a perfectionist maybe in that, right? Or a challenger in that, but when you think of peacemaker, there is a lot of, like I said, diplomatic skills that are necessary in that role. And that makes sense that some of those people navigate to that. Whereas a challenger tends to not see the value of diplomatic solutions.
Speaking of presidents, I don't want to go into it because I don't have a lot of specifics, but the truth is people often assume Donald Trump's an 8. I've heard a number of people, including Ian, say they don't believe he's actually an 8. They believe he's a counterphobic 6, which is yet another...
Counterphobic?
Yeah.
Holy man.
I'm not super well versed in, so I don't want to speak to that.
Counterphobic.
But basically, to say it in the most simplistic way, a super unhealthy 6, driven by fear. And
interesting.
Yeah. Every type, there really is a lot of complexity if you want to just keep diving into the Enneagram. Under each type, there are 3 subtypes, and one of each of the subtypes will be a counter type. So someone who actually doesn't look like their number. And I'll give you the best example, a good example of someone we know. My husband, Ryan, is a self-preservation 4. That's his subtype, which is the counter type. Self-preservation 4s do not frequently look on the outside like a lot of other 4s do. Okay. Behaviorally.
And the self-preservation being that...
well, the 3 subtypes are either social, self-preservation, or what is called sexual, but again, it's actually not about sex.
Not about sex.
It's about intimacy. One-on-one would be a better term.
Okay.
So the self-preservation, it looks different for each number, but is driven by a need to preserve their own self. And that looks different for each person. So anyway, so there is one subtype of each number that actually is the counter type. And like I said, that I haven't educated myself.
So if I'm a challenger and a subtype of challenger, so the subtypes are all 3 the same. Self-preservation,
they are all
social.
The same. Of course, they look very different. In fact, for myself and Ryan, when we are helping someone find their number, once they once they get an idea of their number, we have them read descriptions of the subtype.
Okay.
And the subtypes, like from my one friend I was discussing who realized she was a 1, it was by hearing the 3 subtypes of the 1. Once she heard, in her case, I can't remember, I think she was the social 1, it read her male. So the 1 generally did, but when she read the subtype, and that happened with Ryan.
Do you have the subtypes with you right now?
I do not.
Okay.
But I could pull them up.
Could we find them online? Hold on. So where would they? Would they be on the Enneagram Institute? Like of the
best,
subtypes?
Our favorite person is Beatrice Chestnut. So she wrote the complete Enneagram. It's like the Bible of the Enneagram.
Okay.
So look up Beatrice Chestnut subtypes.
All right. So subtypes of an 8. Solidarity, which is the social 8, is, quote, solidarity. It's the counter type.
Okay. So that means that's the one that's this counter type that doesn't necessarily seem like an 8.
The social 8 is the counter type of the 3 8 subtypes. Social 8s represent a contradiction. The 8 archetype rebels against social norms, but the social 8 is also oriented toward protection and loyalty. They express lust and aggression in the service of life and other people. This person is social antisocial, quote, social antisocial, end quote. In contrast to self-preservation 8s, social 8s are more loyal, more overtly friendly, and less aggressive. See, I was going to say I think I'm a social 8,
Yeah,
but I don't
think
know.
so too.
Okay, so that's more of what I was saying as you were talking. I was like, I think I'm a social 8.
Yeah.
But I don't quite understand what it means by the like. I mean, I definitely rebel against social norms. But then when it says like they express aggression in the service of life and other people. Oh, I guess I can.
I think that.
I guess
when
I see
you
that.
stand up for the marginalized.
Yeah. Interesting. And this gives like multiple paragraphs about this. So
Beatrice Chestnut is
Beatrice
highly regarded.
Chestnut.
Yes.
I
did not read her book yet. She wrote the complete Enneagram.
Okay. We'll put some link to Beatrice Chestnut in the show notes.
Yeah.
That's fascinating.
Yeah.
Very good. Okay, so
anyway,
that's subtypes, which you can dive into that wormhole and like live there for a while. There's also wings. Do you just want to like we've referenced wings a lot.
Yeah.
Can we just maybe give what's a reason that I would even want to know my wing? Or that it might be valuable to know my wing. Just another way that I might process.
Just more information. All of these things, wings, subtypes, stances. I'm trying to think what
triads
else.
Was another one that I wanted to talk about.
Yes. Because triad actually, these are definitely like the deeper levels of the Enneagram.
Yeah. And maybe I will legitimately have you back to go deeper into this, like because I do think some of these other things are helpful. But can we give just an overview of what each of these mean and why they're helpful?
Yes. So the wings are probably what a lot of us do after we discover our type. A lot of us do tend to try to figure out our wings. I've heard plenty of people who say they really could care less about their wings. So it really can be very individual. But I keep saying my husband because he's a good example. Like a 4 with a 3 wing looks a lot different than a 4 with a 5 wing. So it really, understanding the wings is just that next layer of information that is just for more self-awareness, for hopefully to help us identify, our tendencies that we want to work on and transform and change and grow. So that's about what I would say about wings. I personally haven't really spent a lot of time on wings. But like I said, for my husband, it's been helpful. So that one seems kind of...
So what about stances?
Okay, so the stances is something I just recently started looking into. So there are 3 stances, 3 groups. The aggressive stance, the withdrawing stance, and the dependent stance. The aggressive stance are the 3s, 7s, and 8s. Withdrawing are the 4, 5s, and 9s. And the dependents are the 1, 2, and 6s. And when we briefly touched on them, what I said is what's different is the aggressive stance. Why a 3 is aggressive, a 7 is aggressive, and an 8 is aggressive is completely different motivators.
Yeah.
But I did just recently hear Ian describing these. He was interviewing actually Amy Grant. She was trying to figure out her number on the podcast.
On the podcast.
Yeah.
Wow.
And she was between a 3 and a 9. And in the end, she landed on, she's a 9. But the stances helped her because she did not relate to the aggressive stance.
Okay.
So Ian was saying he often introduces the stances to help people clarify.
Okay.
So
interesting. So the stances help maybe if you're struggling to find out what your number is, you might look into the stances and say, oh man, I definitely tend to withdraw in conflict, or I definitely tend, like withdrawing is my, I do premarital counseling. And one of the things is we have like some conflict, like we ask questions like, are you the type when conflict happens that you shut down? Yeah. Are you the type when conflict happens that you literally drive away and gotta leave? Like you can't stay in the room with the person. You gotta you're the one who speeds off in the car when conflict happens.
Yes.
Or are you the type who's like, I'm all in. Exactly. We're solving this today.
Yes.
And so we talk about that more from the standpoint of you need to know that about yourself.
Absolutely.
And you need to know what your partner, how your partner responds to conflict. Because if you know that, we even talk about the idea of it can be helpful to have a code word that whenever someone says whatever that code word is, we have to take a 5-minute break, but we don't get to withdraw from it, but we get a 5-minute break to cool down.
That's
the withdrawal person doesn't get what they want, but the aggressor doesn't get to just go all in without any any moment to kind of pause and think and consider.
Yeah.
And so trying to find a healthy middle ground when you have two people who maybe would respond to conflict differently. So if you're between two numbers and you know those things about yourself already, maybe you've discovered that through conflict or any number of other things, you can be like, okay, I'm between these two numbers, but I'm definitely more the type who's going to withdraw.
Absolutely.
So now I know that's actually probably more likely to be my number. Okay.
Yep. I did just find, so.
Yeah, go ahead.
Suzanne Stabile, another Enneagram expert teacher.
So many links in this podcast. No, it's okay. It's good.
She was personally mentored in the Enneagram by Father Richard Rohr, and she mentored Ian. Actually, Ian and Susan Stabile are actually co-authors of The Road Back to You.
Okay.
When they both talk about the book, they both will say my book, but I mean, they are co-authors.
Gotcha.
On her Instagram, I could read to you a very brief description of the aggressive stance.
Yeah, go ahead.
Since that's what you are and that's what I am. But it says, just as a little more definition. Aggressive stance, 3s, 7s, and 8s. You reframe reality to make it be what you want it to be. But the only reality you're reframing is your own. And you end up fooling only yourself.
Oof.
If you aren't self-reflective at all, you can end up in situations where you don't even know what happened. And you blindly keep moving forward because that is where your focus is, the future. One of the biggest struggles for this stance is that a successful 3, 7, or 8 usually really likes their number and how they operate in the world. But that leads to ignoring the things about their personalities that are not so lovely or likable. And those are the things that will cause you trouble. But because you are so aggressive and you move so quickly, you're not even aware that there is trouble. So her point is slow down, take some time, please.
So can you read the first sentence of that again, or the first couple sentences? Because there was something that really stood out to me.
You, 3, 7s, and 8s, you reframe reality to make it be what you want it to be. But the only reality you're reframing is actually your own, and you end up fooling only yourself. If you aren't self-reflective at all, you can end up in situations where you don't even know what happened.
Yeah, stop there. Okay, so that's really helpful for me. 20-year-old Justin or 25-year-old Justin.
Which, by the way, almost every Enneagram teacher that I've listened to has said, when you're trying to type yourself, think about 20-year-old so-and-so. So funny you say that.
Oh, this is great.
I forgot to mention
because
that.
I'm definitely a challenger. So 20 to 25-year-old Justin would leave a meeting thinking, oh, that went really well.
Yes.
Find out later, that did not go so well.
What happened?
What in the world?
Yes.
Hold on. So
That makes perfect sense.
and I've often chalked that up to like emotional intelligence, but now I'm realizing like so much of that is actually the story I tell myself too. Like it's not necessarily a lack of reading people's emotions or knowing things, but it's more the story I would tell myself. You've got this. It's moving forward. You're going forward. We're all together on this going forward.
Yeah.
And then it's like, holy crap, we're not together anymore. Like, why aren't we together anymore? I thought we were going forward together. Well, because I do think that 8, while they're not afraid of bullies, they can quickly become the bully. Like, I hate to say it like that, but like you can quickly start like telling people like, this is where we're going. This is what we're doing. And this is the only way to do it. And there's no other way. Like, and hey, let me say this though, when you read, and I've read a lot on Martin Luther King Jr., one of my, heroes. Amazing heroes for sure.
Yeah.
And even coming to know my Enneagram number, there's probably a lot of ways that I, identify with some of his impulses and the ways in which he went about things where I'm like, yeah, that connects with me in a different way than some other people who maybe are a little more like slow to champion change. Like, does that make sense? Like, I'm like, oh, why are we waiting? Like,
yes, totally.
And so, but like you really see like his conviction to do things certain ways. And like, there were times where like trusted leaders around him were like, no, Martin, we got to go slower. Like, we got to slow down. We're going too fast. And he was like, nope, not going to happen. And just would do it. And like, and at times that bully mentality, while it was a bully mentality, is actually some of the things we really celebrate about his story. So like, it's not bully in a way of like trying to harm people, but bully in a way of like, I have a vision for where we're going and we're going that way. I can't sacrifice that direction. I can't sacrifice how we get there. We gotta go now. There's no waiting. Like, I'm not staying in the cave. You guys gotta stay here. I guess you gotta stay here. I gotta go. And it's just interesting to read back some of the history of like some of the people that were on his side, all about what he was championing, but had different tactics in how to get there, right? And like and how that would be challenged. But even more, one of the things that's been helpful for me is now when I am in meetings, we have Pastor Allie's on staff too, and so like sometimes after meetings, I'll talk to Pastor Allie about how that meeting went to try to get her perspective. And I don't know her Enneagram number, but I'll talk about like, so how did you think that went, or what's your takeaway from that meeting, or whatever. And like, I might feel some type of way just initially before I process it, but then immediately when I'm processing with her after a meeting, maybe I can already start to see, okay, I'm telling myself a story already because Allie's processing this differently. And I guess what I'm saying is like, I'm far more quick to become aware that I have, maybe this is too aggressive to even say, but like I have an ability to lie to myself about what I experience. And I need confirmation from other people of, did they experience it that way? So like, even last year I was in a very stressful meeting that I felt, we'll just say there was a meeting, I felt very attacked in the meeting. Okay. Like I got very defensive in the meeting because it became it was a long meeting and I felt that way, right? Yeah. So as soon as I left the meeting, I had that feeling. And that was the narrative I told myself, right? Yeah. And then the 2 other people in the meeting felt the same way. And I gave myself permission to feel that way then. I was like, okay, yes, that happened the way you told yourself it happened. But there was a period of time where I was like, until I get a chance to dialogue with these people post this meeting, I'm going to be careful to lean into that emotion. Whereas like 20-year-old Justin would have been like posting on Facebook already. I hate to say it that way, but like I would have just went all in on that. Whereas like now I'm a little more like, oh, was I just like over emotional in that meeting? Like I'm willing to receive the fact that I may have internalized a feeling of someone being against me when really they have questions.
That speaks to your health and work that you've done.
Yeah, but I haven't done much of that with the Enneagram, which I think that's what I really like about the Enneagram is it's like that gives me an ability to have
plenty of work to do.
another lens to reveal some of the shortcomings or some of the spaces in which I can grow. So yeah, that's awesome though to think of it that way, like to.
I'm sure you know Don Miller.
Yeah,
yeah,
of course.
He's a big Enneagram fan, and he had
what's his number?
Ian. He's
know?
a 3.
He's a 3.
He's a diehard 3.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah. He had Ian on his podcast,
Ian had him, and he had Ian, and on Typology, which is Ian Cron's podcast, they talked a lot about the stories we tell ourselves.
Well, the other thing about that is Donald Miller's whole idea of story.
Exactly.
I mean, and if you haven't read the book Story Brand, like that's a great book.
And so on his on Donald Miller's website, he really uses the Enneagram in his business, and he has a great PDF about how to lead each number on the Enneagram on your team if you are a leader. But I even thought I'm part of a team, so I have coworkers. I'm not the leader. I thought that PDF was super helpful, specifically in the work context, in a team context. So
could you argue that organizations have an Enneagram number?
I didn't, but lots of Enneagram experts do.
Well, I more think you could, couldn't you? Like, I mean, almost from a standpoint of like an organization in itself has its own personality or its own story it tells itself or its own values that drive it. And I would say one of the interesting things about the bridge is a challenger in a lot of ways. Like, and I'm not trying to like force that on it, but like I would say like if you look at the history of the bridge, there was a lot being challenged at the inception of the bridge. And,
that was like pre-you.
Well, it was pre-me, exactly. So I'm not trying to like fit myself into the story.
Exactly.
I'm trying to say like I see that and I'm like interesting because like I think challengers would probably be drawn to organizations that are going to challenge, whereas helpers are going to be drawn to organizations that help everybody.
Exactly. And 3s are going to be out there doing things that like Gary V. I don't know his Enneagram number, but I am just guessing.
Gary V's gotta be
a 3. I could be.
You're
wrong.
saying a 3?
Well,
maybe.
I heard him.
Dude, he's all over the place. So, like, if you follow Gary V's Instagram, it's a fun follow.
It's great. There's lots of things to think about.
He's also a challenger, though, because he's challenging a lot of the status quo.
He does.
But he's also a performer. But I could also say he's an enthusiast because he's so enthusiastic about everything he says. Man, I'm just happy. I'm pumped to be alive.
Yeah,
but performer, sure. Yeah, I could see that too. That's interesting.
Why was I?
Why were you were going to? Sorry.
I apologize.
No, you're okay. I interrupted you with the Gary V.
That's okay.
You said Gary V. I had to.
I don't remember why, but I will say this: like Jen Hatmaker was on Ian's podcast. She is a 3.
Okay.
But he really encouraged her to check out Social 8s because he was like, I don't know, Jen, you do possess a lot of those qualities. In the end, because she's a big Enneagram fan, she really does believe she is a 3.
Okay.
But it was an interesting conversation to hear because I learned a lot more about 8s and Social 8s in hearing that discussion because she is a challenger and does have such a heart for the marginalized and those that are being oppressed. So anyway, it's super interesting stuff.
Yeah, Jen Hatmaker definitely. I would have probably guessed 8.
Yeah, but she says hardwired. I read a lot of her and listen to her podcast. She has always been very driven by getting the gold stars, achieving the whatever achievement there is. And
let me say this. I would have guessed my wing would have been a 3. More from the standpoint of like, I have those same tendencies.
Yeah, let me look where the stress and I don't have those memorized.
Yeah, so
So 8.
And this isn't all about me, but we're making it all about me, which I love. It can be all about me. And if you're an 8, you're really like, oh, this is really helpful. But if you're any other number, this isn't really
Actually, for the stress and the health.
Yeah, tell me about that.
The 8, it doesn't go to a 3.
What does it go to?
In health, an 8 goes to the higher side of 2, helper.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
As a pastor, you're helping people.
Right. In stress, I've heard a lot of people say, because a lot of people on Ian's podcast are in the Christian, it's not exclusively Christian, but
sure.
There's a lot of the people who speak are, and a lot of pastors, they say, are 2s. 8s, unhealthy 8s go to the lower side of 5.
Investigator, huh?
Yeah, which
what's the lower side of 5? What would that be described as? I'm just
I don't have that off the top of my head, but the 5 fears are annihilation, being ignorant, being invaded, being incapable, not existing, having obligation placed on them. Their core desire is to be capable and competent. So probably the lower side of that is like really feeling
incompetent, feeling like you you don't know what you're doing.
I mean, for you, because we're your good friend, we've wondered forever, and we have at times we've been like, he could be a 4, he could be a 3. It goes back to the fact that we're all complex, beautiful.
Yeah, there's a spectrum here.
Yeah. So the number part is just where you're dominant, and where a lot of those, where that shadow side has most taken root. Mm-hmm. So you could still be an 8 that's an achiever and performer.
Yeah, definitely. No. Yeah, and I would say like my biggest fear is like if one of the fears I've had to come to grips with is a fear of what other people think of me is a big fear. Like that's probably driven me to like not pursue things that I would have pursued, or not, or just a caution, I guess, to be like, oh, I'm afraid what that person's going to think. Whereas like, I think one of the things I've been trying to shed probably in my 30s the most is like just caring less about what other people think about me. Like not in an unhealthy way of like, I don't care what you think.
Right.
But in a healthy way of like, I can't let what someone thinks about me, especially if I'm not in a relationship with them, which I did care a lot about what people thought about me that I'm not in a relationship with.
Yeah.
I can't let that limit me from exploring an idea, exploring an artistic expression.
Right.
I mean, there were things that took me a long time to get comfortable with, even in music and playing and like putting yourself out there, that you're like, oh, well, I'm not sure how people are going to think about that. Like, and everybody has a certain level of that, but I guess like I would say mine was unhealthy. The other fear is that, like, and I'm really being vulnerable here, but like that people are only going to be loyal with me until a certain point. And part of that comes from experience. I've experienced some of that, but then part of it is like loyalty is really an emotion that's like important to me in a different way than maybe some. So like this is where the backstory becomes important. And I think some of our Enneagram, I guess, traits might also reveal a little bit about our backstory. So I've never met my biological father. So some of the story I've told myself about loyalty, when the story I've been told about my biological father is that my mom got pregnant and he kind of ditched, right? Becomes like, whether that's, and I would say it's largely subconscious, but I can trace a lot back to it of like, wow, okay, I can see I overreacted in that moment because loyalty is so important to me.
Yeah, because you're not going to be like that.
Because I'm not going to be like that. Because I don't want to be attached to people who are like that, who cut and run when it gets hard. Like, does that make sense? So like as a challenger, I'm challenging and things are getting hard and we're just going to, suck it up and it's hard and that's part of life. And so like when someone else who maybe is like, but I'm an enthusiast and this is really hard and I don't like hard things. And I'm like, get away from me. Like, I don't want anything to do with you. Like, because for me, I'm attaching that, I'm divorcing that from the reality of the situation and saying, this person is just a person that's going to fail you like this person back here failed. Do you see what I'm saying? So like, I think I share that not to like, more to say, I think some of our own history really informs some of the negative fears that we have. I mean, that's obvious. That's psychology in general. But
that's a big Enneagram teaching.
Yes.
And they talk about it as our childhood wound.
Yes, that's
Chris
a great
Hewart,
one.
in the Sacred Enneagram really goes more into that. That's a big part of his Enneagram introduction.
Okay.
What
was his name again?
So he is Chris Hewart. And you can find him on Instagram.
All right, that's fine.
But his book's The Sacred Enneagram, and it's spelled Heuertz.
Okay.
And he's an interesting guy. He was mentored by Mother Teresa.
Oh, really?
Yeah. He's one of those guys. I think I mentioned to you, like, you said so was Shane Claiborne.
Yeah.
And Chris and his wife have a place that's similar to like what Richard Rohr's is.
Okay.
So a center that's contemplation and action. Chris really focuses on the Enneagram from the spiritual angle and believes the work that we do once we have this knowledge, these different layers and more knowledge about ourselves, is to use silence, solitude, and what is the other S? Silence, solitude, and
it's okay.
Sorry, there's 3. But contemplative practices.
Sure.
Stillness.
Stillness. Okay.
Because that's actually what my type
I was
means.
going to say that's the one you would struggle with. Yeah.
Totally. And the truth is, I don't remember the other numbers where they all fall, like triad wise, for those solitude, stillness, and
solitude, silence.
Silence. Yeah. But for me, actually, I've been like, the practice of silence is very helpful because when it's silent is when I can't avoid the pain. Because it's very easy to not be silent and just avoid.
Yeah.
Stillness, obviously, to stay. And then for me, actually, all 3 have been very helpful because solitude, I would prefer. Part of it is who I uniquely am, but absolutely most of my life, always with people. So solitude has forced me, and truth be told, in my job, because I'm not solitude all the time, I'm with people, but in between I'm in my car.
Yeah.
And I've had a couple years now of a lot more alone time than I had in the past.
Yeah.
And it's where my greatest growth has been because it's been quiet and still and alone. And those are the places I've been able to actually enter into the pain and enter into the hard things. And so I love Chris Hewart. He's really great about that. But he talks a lot about our childhood wound that sort of does force us, or not force us, but kind of spur on this gravitation to these different types. What I love about him is that he points out, like you gave an example that is a very real wound and happened in reality.
Yeah.
And can be very traumatic. He explains that a lot of us can have perceived wounds that did not actually necessarily, that was a realistic.
A story we told ourselves about a situation that might not be fully rooted in reality.
It's how we perceived it. It happened, and it wasn't necessarily abusive, traumatic by definition, but to us, it was.
Yeah.
And that has been really helpful for me. Looking back at my childhood and looking back at why I have these certain tendencies. And in my case, perceived wound has been really helpful.
Well, and I would even say, like, as a parent, like I can see perceived wounds that my kids have had in that, like, and not in like a, like, oh man, here's my kid going again, saying that this is terrible or whatever. But like, even like a kid being part of a meeting or something and like seeing something, noticing something and like overreacting to it. Like, oh my gosh, that means this, that, and the other thing.
Right.
I've had that happen. And like my kids come to me like, oh, well, what about this? And I'm like, that's
that
not even happen. That's not even happening. Like that's not, that's literally like 20 moves down the road. If every move is a negative move, like, you know what I mean? Like that's not, or like Brittany and I'll be having a conversation. Stop fighting. Like, are you going to get a divorce? Like, and I've our kids have asked us that, and so it's like, we're not even fighting right now. We're literally having a conversation about where we're going to dinner. So like, you know, like this isn't a big, like we're emotional about whether it's sushi or Red Robin tonight. Like, I don't know, like what's the, well, it's just like, this isn't of course we would be emotional about this decision. Like, why wouldn't we? Like, but like for them, they might have just heard earlier in the day that their friends' parents are getting divorced. And so their friends' parents are getting divorced. And the moment they see a conflict in any way, they're now attaching that reality that they're hearing about their friends to their parents or something. And so like there's often times where I'm sitting here like, that's not something you have to worry about, nor is it something that's happening. That's not reality. And like, and so I can see how a child that might not feel like they can approach their parents or approach their family with some of that information, or just choose not to. Maybe their parents are very approachable, but they just choose not to. Right. Might tell themselves a story that they keep telling themselves and keep telling themselves. And now they're an adult and they have this narrative that isn't necessarily rooted in reality, but it is a fear that they've held on to for so long that now they've got a lot of processing to do.
Which this is another example where it's just one tool, but that language of perceived wound,
perceived childhood wound,
childhood wound. For me, in my understanding of life, it was really helpful. And back to, even though we've gone over our time limit,
no, you're fine.
The Enneagram practically, like for myself and my husband, who are all types are different, but we're very different types. It really, we say over and over again, the Enneagram has given us language to things that we were experiencing, sometimes didn't know at all, sometimes did, but did not have the language. But the language often that we've found in Enneagram world has just been like, it has been like someone read our mail and it's like, yes, that explains it. That explains it. So there's so much, as we've kind of touched on, as far as language, because there's types, there's subtypes, there's stances, wings.
Yeah. One of the things I think is great about the Enneagram when you think relationally is that therapy is pretty expensive, or, you know, it can be. Getting counseling can be very expensive. Yeah. And I'm not in any way saying, oh, the Enneagram can be your substitute to counseling. Like, I think counseling and having a guide is really important and really helpful. Yeah. But one of the things that one of the ways that couples often enter into counseling is
crisis.
She needs to be fixed, or he needs to be fixed.
Absolutely.
But there's often not an ownership of your piece of the pie or what you're bringing to the table that might be contributing to the conflict or contributing to the reality. What I love about the Enneagram, and especially if someone is maybe feeling a stress in their relationship or feeling like they're in crisis, is that as you dive into the Enneagram, you get the opportunity to begin to say, okay, where are my faults?
Absolutely.
It starts with me owning my reality and what I bring to the table. That's not to say that your partner doesn't have more pieces of the pie to own. I don't know your situation, but it is to say there's almost certainly something that you need to own. Absolutely. And it is a way of introduction into inventory and like really taking that self-awareness and seriously and it can contribute a lot to a healthier you, which is ultimately going to be a healthier relationship with the people that you're in relationship with. And so it is a tool, like Ryan says, it's a tool. And I do think it's a tool that ultimately helps us know ourselves better, but as we journey through it, either with our partner or with our friend or with a family member or whatever, coworkers, it can better our relationships with them because we now understand each other in a different way. Yep. And
actually, on that note, Ian and Suzanne end their book with a Thomas Merton quote that you may or may not have heard because it's a great one.
Okay.
So this is Thomas Merton. It says, "The beginning of love is the will to let those we love be perfectly themselves. The resolution not to twist them to fit our own image. If in loving them we do not love what they are, but only their potential likeness to ourselves, then we do not love them. We only love the reflection of ourselves that we find in them."
Oof. Wow.
Yeah.
It's heavy.
That's a great one.
That's a great quote.
And that is, in my experience, what the Enneagram has helped me. First of all, it's helped me learn to do that to myself. To learn
to love yourself.
To learn to love myself and to learn to not just love what I think I want to be and who I've told myself I am, especially someone who, has tended not to want to face reality. So so my stories, that's a whole nother story, but learning to love myself as I am and who I am, and not just this reflection of, well, I want to be this and I want to be that. And then definitely in my relationships, learning that the people that I love, that they are themselves and they are unique and they see the world differently, they experience the world differently, and that I need to validate that and give that space and not be like, but you need to be like me, especially parenting.
Well, that's good.
So I love that quote, and Thomas Merton.
That's a great place to end, I feel like.
I think so too.
Annette, thank you for being on.
My pleasure.
Another episode down. I want to thank Annette Moran for being with me again and for sharing with us her love for the Enneagram and encouraging us to each grow in our understanding of ourselves and our relationships. It was great to have you with me today on Beyond Boundaries. If you want to learn more about me or find the show notes for this episode or watch some cool videos from Palestine and Israel, go to pastorjustindouglas.com. You can interact there with feedback, comments, and questions, or you can reach out via Instagram where you can see a bunch of different pictures of my trip as well, and that's at Pastor Justin Douglas. Please consider subscribing, rating, reviewing, and sharing. It really does make a difference. May you go and live a life that is beyond boundaries, giving others love, exploring new ideas, and championing belonging.